get a little bit more comfortable. Who should show up but Mr. McFeely, his mailman? And Mr. Rogers and Mr. McFeely started having a conversation, and Mr. Rogers said, "It is so hot. Wouldn't you like to cool off a little bit?" And Mr. McFeely said that would be a good idea. So he took off his socks and shoes and put his feet in the same foot bath as Mr. Rogers. Mr. McFeely was black. And this episode aired precisely when, in the United States, people were still coming to grips with what integration really meant. It was summertime, and many people were saying black people and white people should not swim in the same swimming pools. There sat Mr. Rogers with his friend and neighbor, their feet together in that little foot bath. Neighborly kindness is what Mr. Rogers was all about. And for those of us who are Christians, you can't help but also see in that moment an echo of the story of Jesus washing the feet of his disciples. Mr. Rogers was always about loving others, liking others, and serving others. Such a genius at living out this gospel. Like Jesus, Mr. Rogers rarely, almost never, addressed political issues at a political level. There was one occasion when he was called to speak to Congress about funding public television. That's a separate matter, but mostly he did not address political issues at a political level. Rather, he helped us to see them from the perspective of loving kindness. Writer Tom Junod wrote, Mr. Rogers had this amazing ability to look into people and see past the adult facade that we see, and instead take a really direct look at the aching kid that's within all of us, and then to decide what that aching kid needed. Now, Tom Junod is the journalist who wrote that 1998 Esquire profile of Mr. Rogers that inspired A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, that movie that was starring Tom Hanks, and it's really a lovely movie to watch. An ardent and faithful correspondent to those who were his friends, Mr. Rogers would often write something like, "You are loved with a greater love than anyone could imagine." He believed and trusted that each person is uniquely made in the image of God. He wrote, "There isn't anybody in the whole world exactly like you. Never has been and never will be. You are loved by the one who created you in a unique way." Now, this isn't just a statement for Mr. Rogers. It was his call. It's kind of deceptive the way he lived out this call, making it look like child's play. But it wasn't. Not at all. It was radical work. It was hard work. It was intentional work. This loving of others and loving others as much as possible in a way that made room for God's love to flow through him and be present human being that is in front of